AITA for moving into the house I inherited, even though my lodger feels unsafe around men. I, 30s male, recently inherited a house from my grandmother. I've lived in various places before, but this house was different. It was my childhood home, and I have memories of it that go way back. I wasn't really close to my grandmother in my adult years, but I still spent a lot of time there when I was younger. It's an old house, but it has a lot of sentimental value. When I found out I inherited the property, I wasn't sure what to do with it at first. I was living in a small apartment, paying rent, and the idea of moving into the house seemed perfect. It's bigger, and it would save me a ton of money on rent. It also meant I could take my time to sort through my grandmother's things, which have been piling up in the attic for years. My grandmother had a lot of stuff, and I wasn't ready to deal with it right away. However, when I moved in, I discovered that the house wasn't empty. My grandmother had a lodger, a woman in her 30s, with a 6-year-old daughter, living in one of the rooms. I knew about her, of course. She'd been renting from my grandmother for a while, but I didn't realize the full scope of the living arrangement. When I found out, I was a little taken aback, but I figured it wouldn't be a big deal. After all, it's just a room in the house, and she had been there for a while. I assumed things would go smoothly, and we'd coexist without any issues. But then, everything started to go sideways. The first clue that things weren't going well came from a note she left on the kitchen counter. I hadn't even realized she was home when I arrived, but there it was, a small, neatly written note. It read, "I'm not sure how this is going to work out, but I don't feel comfortable living in the house anymore now that you're here. I've lived here for a while, and it's always been a calm, peaceful environment. I'm worried about my daughter, and I don't feel safe living here with a man I don't know." At first, I was confused. We hadn't even spoken yet, but I could sense there was tension in the air. I tried to brush it off, assuming she was just nervous because of the change. But the more I thought about it, the more it bothered me. I mean, this was my house now, and I didn't feel like I should have to leave just because someone else didn't feel comfortable. I left a note in response, just trying to clear the air. I told her that she could stay as long as she liked, but if she felt uncomfortable, she could leave whenever she wanted. I offered a timeline that would give her enough time to find somewhere else to live. I was trying to be understanding, but I also didn't want to feel like I was being pushed out of my own home. A few days passed, and I didn't hear anything from her. But then I got another note. "I will leave, but I'm upset that I'm being asked to move out just because you're here. I don't want to be in a situation where I have to go back to my ex's house. We moved here so my daughter could go to a good school, and now it feels like that's all falling apart because of you." At this point, I was really starting to feel like I was in the middle of something I didn't ask for. My first instinct was to help her find a solution, but the more I thought about it, the more I realized there was nothing I could do. She had her reasons, and I had mine. I had moved in because the house was mine, and I was trying to make it work for both of us. As the days went by, the tension only grew. She started leaving more notes, and each one seemed more urgent and more personal. She told me how she had been living with her ex before, and that her decision to move into my grandmother's house had been a way to escape. Her ex had been abusive, and she didn't feel comfortable living with a man, especially after what she had been through. I tried to empathize with her, but I also felt trapped. I didn't know how to solve this for her without it affecting me. I had my own life, my own responsibilities, and I couldn't afford to just leave my own house. At one point, I asked her if she would consider seeing a therapist or counselor to help her work through her issues with men. I thought maybe some professional guidance would help her feel more at ease. She responded in another note, saying that she didn't have the time or money for therapy, and that she just wanted to feel safe in her own living situation. She mentioned that the only reason she was able to live here was because of the low rent, only $150 for utilities and housework. That was another thing that weighed heavily on my mind. If she left, I couldn't just lower the rent for a new tenant. Renting out the house wouldn't cover the mortgage, and I couldn't afford to make up the difference. I realized that my hands were tied in a lot of ways. If I moved out, I'd still have to pay for the house, and that wasn't an option for me. I had a mortgage to cover, and without the rent money from the lodger, I would struggle to make ends meet. I didn't want to sell the house because I wanted to keep it in the family, and I couldn't afford to be reassessed for taxes if I didn't move in within a year. It seemed like I had two choices. I could either continue living here and deal with the tension, or I could move out and lose the house and all the benefits that came with it. I wrote back to her, letting her know that I understood her concerns, but that I couldn't move out. I offered her the option to find a female tenant to take my place, but that didn't seem like a viable option either. Even if I found someone, the rent wouldn't cover the mortgage, and I would be left in an even worse situation. Her response to my letter was another note. where she told me that she would start looking for a new place to live. She seemed upset, but also resigned to the fact that she didn't have many options. She was afraid that if she moved out, she'd have to go back to her ex, and she didn't want that. She also pointed out that the whole reason she moved in here was for the school district, and now that was being taken away from her. I couldn't blame her for feeling that way. I could see how hard this situation was for her. But at the same time, I had my own responsibilities and realities to deal with. I couldn't just throw away everything I had worked for to make room for someone else's comfort. I decided to be as fair as possible and told her that she could stay for as long as she needed, but that she had to make plans to move out eventually. I didn't want to force her out, but I also couldn't continue living in a state of constant tension. Now I'm torn. I feel bad that she's in this difficult situation, and I wish I could do more to help. But I also feel like I'm being asked to sacrifice too much for someone I barely know. I can't move out of my own house. I can't afford to make up the difference in rent, and I can't sell the house because of tax reassessment. So here I am, stuck in the middle of a difficult situation, trying to be as fair and empathetic as possible while also protecting my own interests.